you think about miracles, what do you think? Do you think they still happen in your life? Do you think modern day miracles are still a thing? For some of you, you're like, oh yeah, definitely. But some of you are like, I'm not so sure. For some of you, you might say, actually what keeps you from really putting your trust into Jesus is this whole miracle thing. Like, can that really happen today? And did that really happen in the past? You know, for me, I believe that they do happen today. One of the things that I think that keeps us from seeing them is the pace of life keeps us moving so fast that something just moves right by us and we're just like, oh, it's just a coincidence. Or, oh, that just kind of happened. But I think if we slowed down for a second, we would begin to see that there's some pretty awesome things going on. And when I talk about this idea of miracles, I want us all to be on the same page as far as what is the definition that we're working with for a miracle. We're saying from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary that a miracle is an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. All right, so now the thing when you look at this definition, and when we all kind of go, well, is that a miracle? Maybe that's a miracle to you, it's not a miracle to me. We all have to define, what does extraordinary look like? Right, for some of you, your ordinary might be a bit extra to me. Right, and my ordinary might be a bit extra to you. Based on our experiences, based on where life has us, we all have different things that look like and act like in our lives something that is extraordinary. When you think about, okay, but what is that thing that manifests divine intervention, saying, I need God to help me? And then I believe for all of us, whenever we experience a miracle, and even as we're going to see, as we're going to look into the New Testament, when miracles happen, because I'm speaking as if I believe they do, when a miracle happens, it impacts life. It impacts people around us. And while we all may say, hey, that's a miracle to me, but that's not to me, but this is a miracle to me, but that's not to me, and we kind of go, I'm not exactly sure what I would call a modern day miracle, there are events that happen locally, events that happen regionally, that happen nationally, even on a global level, where I believe that when these events happen, they truly are extraordinary events, that it causes the world to pause, or at least the region where they are. In this case, what I'm going to show you, it definitely causes the media to hit the pause button. Whatever they were going to cover, everybody cuts away. To me, when everybody has that type of response, it has to be extraordinary. And to me, when it's on that level, then I think we would all walk away on some level saying, if God didn't intervene, that was going to be really bad. And then when we look at it too, you go, oh, that impacted a lot of human lives, and there's no way that was just a coincidence. So I want you to watch this, and then we're going to discuss one of these events that I believe impacted so many people.
Brace! Heads down! Stay down!
It's okay, let me hold it.
Stay down!
Benimle sevdiğim Christina'nın
We're not going to make it, Uncle Robbie.
Brace! Heads down! Stay down!
We're stars.
Brace! Heads down! Stay down!
We do, darling.
January the 15th, 2009. To the 155 people on flight 1549, that was a miracle. Right? I mean, I've got a feeling those who would say, I don't even know who I believe in or if I believe in anything, they were praying to somebody, hoping. They were hoping for some divine intervention. Right, and you can look at that and you can say, yeah, but that's science. That's the skill of Sully, the guy that was flying the plane. He had all this going on. I'm like, I don't deny that science is at play. I do not deny the skill. But I'm telling you, all it took was one little bit. That nose got down a little bit too far, and that plane's going end over end. And it's a totally different outcome. Right? Miracles, when we see things like that, I believe it helps us all realize that there is something way bigger, because we really can't explain what we just saw right there. And in this series, we're going to talk about miracles where God was involved, where there was divine intervention, and it changed lives forever. I love that we get to talk through what it is that Jesus did. And as we look at these miracles that he performed, what it does is it lets us learn more about him. It reveals to us who he is, his character, and then it helps us see how can we apply this in our lives. How can we, as we learn more about him, draw closer to him? And today, if you're watching online, or maybe you're watching this at a later date, or those of us who are here in the room, if you're like, I'm not sure I fully believe all this, we're glad you're here. My hope is that as we journey through this and you reveal more things, we reveal more things about who Jesus is, it helps you see who he truly is. Because I think for all of us, it's easy to forget. It's easy for us to take who Jesus is and shrink him down. And we can see him as like he's the bad guy, and we're over here trying to get what we want from him. And we truly forget who he is and how he sees us and what his desires are for us. And so through these miracles, we're gonna reveal together more about him. And for those who would say, I don't know that I believe in him yet, I hope it gives you confidence. I hope it inspires you on some level to go, I want to get to know that guy a little bit more. And you'll just take a step. Right? And for those of us who grew up in church, maybe you would say, hey, I'm that church person. And when I tell you what miracle that we're going to talk to, you're going to be like, oh, I know that one. What I want to ask you is do not check out. Right? I think what we do a lot is we just gloss over. We gloss over what's there because we feel like we know it all. But if we would just slow down, me included, and I've loved being able to dig in and slow down to stories that I've heard since I was this big. And that's what I hope we do through this, is it reveals to us more about what's in this story, more about who Jesus is, and then let's apply it. You've been coming for a little while or a long while. I'm a big fan of application. Knowledge for knowledge's sake will make you smarter. But even if we had the room 3 times as full and nobody applied anything you heard here, it's not helpful. But when we can begin to apply what we see in Scripture, and we begin to take it and use it in our life, it will change our lives and those around us. And that is my goal for each of us, is to continually be growing in our faith. So we're going to look at the miracle that is where Jesus fed the 5,000. Some of you are like, got it. All right, the thing that's really interesting about this miracle is that it is the only miracle that's in all 4 Gospels. Now, the Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each of these guys captured the story of Jesus. And this is the only miracle that they chose to put in each of their books. Now, if you take the time and you want to go cross-reference all these miracles, what you will find is that how Matthew told it, Mark, Luke, and John told it are not identical. And for some, that's been a hang-up for you. You would say, well, I don't know that I can trust the Bible because it's the same story, but it has, when you read it, all the same details aren't there. Think about that. If they all had the exact same details, then it would mean they absolutely collaborated with one another. I mean, if I randomly picked one person from here, one here, and one there, and I said, I want each of you to write down your experience about what happened today at Wiregrass Church. Retell what went on in this room in a written story. It would all be enough similar that everybody would be like, okay, they were obviously all at Wiregrass Church, this, but some are going to see one thing, some are going to see another. Some are going to be impacted by one thing, some are going to be impacted by another. What you also have to remember about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is they wrote to different audiences with different purposes. So when you see it one way and you have a purpose, you're going to retell the story one way. But I just want to lay that out there so no one walks away going, well, if they're not the same, then I can't believe what the Bible says. And remember, the Bible does not contradict itself. So today we're going to jump in. We're going to look at this story. I'm going to specifically walk us through the book of Mark. So if you have a Bible app or you have your Bible and you want to walk through it with us, I'll also put them on the screen for you. We are going to specifically look at what goes on from Mark's telling of the story of the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to be in chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 30. We're going to wrap up in verse 42. Now, the first thing I want to tell you as we jump into this is that we're going to look at what's the primary purpose of the feeding of the 5,000. And then we're going to look at what is the secondary. What was Jesus also teaching as he performed this miracle? Because the thing about his miracles is that many times his primary was performed in order to be able to accomplish the secondary. So what we're going to do each time in this series is we're going to look at the primary, learn what we can about that, but then we're also going to dig in and say, okay, God, what were you also teaching through the secondary? That's how we're going to move through the reading this morning. Now, before we jump into the first verse there in verse 30, I also want to let you know the feeding of the 5,000 was not actually the feeding of the 5,000. Some of you know this. If you look at verse 44 in Mark chapter 6, it actually says it was 5,000 men. But then when you dig in, what Bible scholars say is it could be a number as high as 20,000. That's Rip Hughes Stadium filled twice. That's how many were looking at Jesus, looking at the disciples with this expectation. So you may hear me say the feeding of the 5,000 or the feeding of the 20,000. It's the same crew. It just looks different depending on how you see that number as you think about this story and we walk through it together this morning. So we're going to jump in. Mark chapter 6, verse 30. Here's where it begins. It says, the apostles gathered together, that's also the disciples, gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. And you're thinking, what does this have to do with the feeding of the 20,000 people? Well, it's good to know what was going on in the disciples' life. Now, one thing we need to remember about the disciples, they're not the sage old men like you see in pictures, right? They don't look like Gandalf. They're like old teenagers at most, right? So when you think about them and you think about how they responded in this, when you think about what their issues was, when you think about some of the things you say, you can go, oh, their frontal lobe wasn't even fully developed yet. Right? I mean, they knew Jesus, but still, this is the age where they were. And what had happened at this point was Jesus had just sent them out 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. 6 groups of 2 went out. He gave them the ability to heal. It's pretty amazing. Think about that. And they went out preaching, helping people understand what it was to follow Jesus. And in this moment, right before we jump into our miracle, they had all just returned. They were hanging out with Jesus. Imagine the excitement. We saw this, then this happened, then this whole family put their trust in you, then I healed this guy. And that's what they were wanting to do. And there were 12 of them at once trying to do it. And they were all gathered around, and they were hanging out telling this to him. Verse 31 tells us that because so many people were coming and going, they didn't even have a chance to eat. That's important. They didn't even get a chance to eat. Imagine so many people. And don't miss this, because now they had the power to heal, because now they had been preaching. People were starting to follow them and gather up around them as well. So when they saw them there by the Sea of Galilee, people gathered around. And there was so many that they couldn't even eat. I'm guessing it was hard to communicate. And when we talk about what does this reveal about Jesus, I love that what we get to see in this next verse is that Jesus deeply cared for his disciples. He cared for his 12. And what he told his disciples, he said, come on, we got to get away. He said, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Jesus knew what they needed. I love the fact that if I can slow down and tune in to my Heavenly Father, right? Because I feel like at times I'm going fast. Right? But when he said, hey, I know what you need. I know that you need to rest. And I know that you need to get away from everybody. So here's what he told them, moving on. He says, so what did they do? He said, we're going to get on a boat and we're going to move to a very solitary place. Again, this all ties into what we're about to experience and read throughout the story. So he put them on a boat. He took them to this solitary place where there was nothing at all was out there. And he took off. Here's what we learn as they're in the boat headed that way. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. put yourself in the disciples' shoes at this moment. What did they want? Well, they wanted to spend some time with Jesus, right? They wanted to unpack and celebrate and remember and hear each other's stories. They wanted this solo time. They needed to rest. They needed to be away from people. You ever find a day where you're like, I just need to be away from people? You ever just been out of words? Like, I don't think they were out of words, but they were out of words for other people. That was what they were wanting. That was what they were expecting. That was what Jesus had set up to them was, hey, we're going to get away from everybody, a little respite, and we're going to recover. And then we're going to get up and we're going to go again. But that's not at all what happened. One of the commentaries I read talked about that people recognized the sail of their boat, and as they went across the Sea of Galilee, they said, they're leaving. And it was a 4 miles to traverse across the Sea of Galilee. But the people, in their excitement, took off running, and they figured out it's 8 miles to go around the Sea of Galilee, to get where they were, around the other side, and go meet Jesus and the disciples where they were coming ashore. Like, imagine that. Like, they didn't have running attire. They didn't even take fuel with them. It doesn't say they took water with them. All we know is that they took off and they started running. That's men, women, children, old people, young people. I would have loved to have seen 20,000 people, right? Not just from one spot, but from the surrounding towns and villages. And they all met in one spot. And somehow they made it before Jesus got there. So what did he do? When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd of 20,000 people, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. What does this reveal to us about who Jesus is? Even though he had a plan, even though he was with his people, right? These were like, we would call like church people. These would be like me. I'm not Jesus, but like, I am the pastor here. It'd be like me hanging out with a bunch of my inside people who I love, who do incredible ministry. And we're just sharing, and it's just a great thing. But all of a sudden, 20,000 people who'd be considered lost sheep show up. What do? Do I stay with those who are insider church people? Or do I see 20,000 over here who I'm like, they need what we have? And that's the hope and the love of Jesus. And Jesus, as much as he loved these people, and as much as I would love these people, what Jesus said, we got to go there. We've got to go take care of those 20,000. We're going to be okay. Let's go and take care of them. And when we see the word compassion, you and I think about compassion. I don't know who you think is the most compassionate person in your life. For me, I think of my grandmother. But when we see this word compassion, when we look at it in the Greek text, it really refers to a more visceral response. A visceral response is one that engages all of your internal organs, and you feel it inside of you on a way deeper level than just feeling compassion, maybe in your brain or maybe in your heart. Only Jesus do they use this word, this translation of comparison for, because that's what he felt when he saw the 20,000 coming at him. Remember, he's all-knowing. He's infinite. He saw them and he knew them. He knew their sins. He knew their hurts. He knew their sorrow. And when he had the chance to hang out with his boys, he said, I'm rushing to them. That's where his heart was. For us as believers, I hope those of us who've put our trust in Jesus, that's our natural inclination too. I love hanging with you, but this is who we're called to serve. And he references them in a reference that makes total sense to them as a sheep without a shepherd. In their world, that was common. Nobody, if your sheep didn't have a shepherd, your sheep were going to be destroyed. They're defenseless. They didn't know what to do. And in their world, they were like, oh my goodness, we can't have sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus, in that moment, began to realize what he was there to do was to be their shepherd. He knew it. He knew it was going to happen before it happened. And then what he did is he sat. He sat and taught. I think this is one piece in this miracle that people miss. Because we jump right to, wow, how did he feed 5,000, 20,000? We miss the fact that he had compassion. We miss the fact that he didn't hang out with the people that he was more inclined to hang out with, and he went to those who needed him the most. And then he sat and taught for hours upon hours upon hours. It says that the sun started to fall. The shadows started to get long. And it says by this time, we see what the disciples say. By this time, it was late, and his disciples came to him. Now remember, these are hungry teenage boys, right? So this makes a lot of sense. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. And he's going, thank you, knew that, right? But there's a plan. They said, send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. They're done. They're like, hey, I don't see how this is going to happen. Here's a need, I see it. They're thinking about it through their own brain, and they get over here together because it says the disciples, not one of them, all of them come to him and go, hey, we're not saying this, but we're hungry. They've got to be hungry. They ran 8 miles. They've been sitting here for hours. We got to get them out of here. It's for their safety, right? Safety first. I love Jesus' response. He says, but he answered, you give them something to eat. You, like he didn't even entertain what they had said. You feed them. Like, no, this is your responsibility. You make it happen. Again, teenage boys, they're like, their response, they said to him, that would be more than half a year's wages, exclamation point. They came at him with some enthusiasm, right? Some excitement of like, how are we going to do that? One of the text references and said it would be 8 months. Another one said that when they paid 8 months worth of their wages, that they would get one bite of bread. So they're like, we can't do this. Like they're saying, there's no way we can do this, which is exactly where Jesus wanted them to be. For us, Jesus wants us to reach a point where we go, I can't do this on my own. We look at our own resources and we go, no, I got this. And then eventually, hopefully we go, no, I can't. And when we finally say, no, I can't, when we finally recognize that, then it leaves room for God to go, okay, I've been here the whole time. You've just been trying to carry it all on your own. Jesus then steps in. He says, how many loaves do you have? He asked. And he said, go and see. Go check through all 20,000 people. And when they did, they went through, imagine how long that took. They went through all 20,000 people. I mean, you're talking about a bunch of irresponsible adults. How does that many people have nothing? But that's how excited they were. Like, hey, there goes Jesus and the disciples. And they just went to running. They're like, don't worry about food. We got Jesus. They went to running, and the only thing that was there was 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Basically a Lunchable. That's all they got. I call it the 5 and 2 lunch. They're looking around and they're like, here's what we got. Can you imagine the little boy? He's thinking, surely somebody's got better than this. And they just keep walking. Anybody got any food? What I love is that he willingly gave it away. He had no idea if he was going to be fed or if Jesus was just going to go eat it himself. He's like, well, I guess the big man gets it, right? He's the boss. He gets all the food. We'll just suffer out here. But he willingly gave his Lunchable. Not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing the outcome, not knowing what was guaranteed for him. Figured he's like, well, I figure I'm probably just going to go hungry like everybody else. And he gave it. And he said, Jesus, do something with it. And then the story continues because he was willing. I love what it says. Jesus then directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. Can you imagine 20,000 people who are hungry? And then you introduce food? What's going to happen? Chaos. Especially if you saw that a Lunchable is what came to the front. And you're like, well, what do I do to get a cracker? What's in here? Cracker, cheese, and an Oreo. Not even a good Oreo. Right? They're like, oh, chaos is going to ensue. What we look about and what we see about Jesus is that he's a God of order. We think chaos, and there is chaos out there, but that's not his MO. He recognized what was needed was not only spiritual feeding, physical feeding, but also there was need to be some order and some process. So he said, everybody, have them sit down. Break up into groups of hundreds and break up into groups of 50s. And then as we continue on, here's what happens next. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up. And he looked up and he gave thanks to heaven. And he broke the loaves. The thing about this crowd were Jews. Jesus is Jewish. He knew the Jewish culture. He knew the Jewish prayers. I thought this was interesting as I read through it, is that he probably prayed a prayer that all of them knew as a prayer of thanksgiving to pray before a meal. So as he prayed, and they had no idea how this was going to work out. It's possible that all of them could have repeated that prayer with him, and then all at once they could have said amen together. And in that moment, to me, there's something powerful about that. Nobody really knew. They're just going, well, we're going to see what happens here. And then, after he took care of the bread, he gave it to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided 2 fish among them all. In this story, we kind of sometimes just stop right there. Here's something that's really amazing. I love what the next verse says. They all ate and were satisfied. Like if I told you right now we were going to be satisfied with this right here, like just right here on this front row, this ain't going to satisfy us. But they ate so much. They ate so much that they were not only full, this is like going to Golden Corral full. You know what I mean? Where you're loosening your belt and you're like, I don't know why I did that. I mean, they were so full they could not eat anymore. And then Jesus, as only Jesus is, said, hey, we're not done yet. Go round up everything that's left. And 12 baskets, 1 for each disciple. I love how Jesus interacted with so many people in this miracle. The primary was to feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He took care of their needs. That's what the majority of us walk out when someone says, tell me about that miracle. You're like, well, the title says it all. But when we look at what are some secondary reasons, what are the secondary purposes of this miracle? Well, one is that Jesus provides more than enough. For some of you this morning, that's what you need to hear. You need to know that wherever you are in life, whatever you're struggling with, you're like, I don't know how this is going to work out. What I can guarantee you is that Jesus' model, and I can't guarantee you what it looks like or how it's going to work out, but I can guarantee you that he provides more than enough. Those disciples who hadn't eaten way back on the front end of this miracle, by the end are walking away each with a basket of bread and fish. Jesus provides for our needs, our physical and our spiritual. That's one. But I want to dig down deeper and look at one other thing this morning. What I want us to look at is what Jesus did that was different in this miracle from other miracles. Think about our miracle from last week, and if you missed it, I hope you'll go back and watch it. It's where Jesus healed the paralyzed man who'd been paralyzed for 38 years. And Jesus didn't use anything or anybody. Jesus looked at him, didn't even touch him, and said, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And the guy got up, picked up his mat, and walked. All by himself. You look at the majority of Jesus' miracles, he does them all by himself. Many times he doesn't even touch them. Sometimes he's not even in the same town with them. But when you look at this miracle, we look at a secondary impact from this miracle. What we see is that Jesus invited people in to be a part of this miracle. He's already demonstrated he doesn't have to. He's already demonstrated that it's not necessary for him. He can do it all on his own. But in this miracle, multiple times, Jesus invited those around him to be a part of his big story. Is that why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John put it in all 4? I don't know. But to me, it's significant. Right, we're going to look at Mark chapter 6, verse 37. We're going to back up. And right here, when they said, well, what are we supposed to do? We need to feed them. He said, you give them something to eat. In this moment, he could have said, I got it. We're good. Y'all go back over there. I got this. Right, but he didn't. He said, you figure, and they knew, they were like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? But he said, I need you to be a part of this. We see it again in verse 41. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He didn't need that, right? I mean, he could have said, all of your bellies are now full. And they would have been like, woo, I'm so full. Don't know how it got there, but man, I'm full. He could have done that. Or he could have just said, you're no longer hungry. And he's just been gone. And that would have been another miracle. And they'd be like, I don't know how it happened, but we never got hungry. But in this miracle, Jesus said, I'm going to use some outside things. He utilized that little boy. Can you imagine the story of that little boy? You're not going to believe this. I showed up with all these irresponsible adults, and I'm the only one that had food, and I gave it to him. Next thing, and he just rattled it all off. But he chose to use the little boy. You think about in their culture how children were viewed, and it was not good at all. But Jesus chose to use and work through this little boy. He chose to work through this nominal amount of food. Again, he didn't have to do any of that. But what he decided was he was going to invite people in to his story. Then, there's one more. He then gave it in verse 41. It goes on, it says, he gave it to the disciples to distribute. He didn't need them. He could have chosen to create pink parachutes and like airdropped it to everyone, right? All 20,000. But he chose to ask the disciples or tell the disciples, you're going to be part of this story. Can you imagine the impact? Even though they had just come off of incredible ministry, healing people, they were seeing something they had never seen in their life. I don't know what their basket looked like, but whatever their basket size was, there was bread and fish, or maybe he just had bread and he had fish. I don't know. But they passed it out. But every time he's like, okay, here's 50 more. And he went to the next group of 50 and I still have more bread. And the next group of 100 and I still have more bread. Like at what point did it start to kick in that my basket is not going to run out of bread? And on and on and on and on and on for 20,000 people. God said, I am going to invite the disciples in on a different level to be a part of my big story. See, God delights in working through us. He doesn't have to. He was going to feed those 20,000, however. The other miracles that he conducted on his own, he did them on his own. But in this case right here, he said, I could do it on my own, but I delight in the human people that I've created. I mean, he delights in us so much. Look at how many of us there are. And he said, I want you to be a part of my big story. See, Jesus is willing to use whatever we are willing to place in his hands. Jesus is willing to use whatever you are willing to place in his hands. Some of us think, but I don't have much. I'm not so sure. I love what Jesus said to Paul. Paul was one of the guys that created a bunch of the churches after Jesus left. This is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. Jesus is speaking and he's saying, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness, and that weakness is our weakness. When we're willing to say, God, here's my talent, skills, and ability, you use them. Then he says, I can work with that. When we reach a point that we're like, I can't do it all on my own, and God, in my weakness, I'm going to bring you what I have, my talent, skills, and abilities. He says, I can use that. What I believe for us as a church is that so many of us have talent, skills, and abilities. And he looks at us and he says, if you will just give them to me, I can use that. For those of you who do serve and you're a part and you've plugged in, thank you for saying, I will use my talents, my skills, and my abilities in a way that grows God's kingdom. Because all he asks us to do is to bring it to him. Just like the little boy brought the Lunchable, the little boy had no idea what God was going to do. When I think about Wiregrass Church, I see a lot of people who have talent, skills, and abilities. And what if we all put them to use? What if we all said, what's my little part that I can do? And you think, well, mine's not that big. No, there are no insignificant gifts that God gives you. Right? For those that have been around for a while, you remember when there used to be people all over the parking lot welcoming people in. And those are people who said, I have no desire to do anything technical. I have no desire to work with kids. They said, but I know I can do something. What can I do? I love meeting people and greeting people. And there were people all in the parking lot, and the experience was totally different at Wiregrass Church many years ago. Imagine when we can get back to that. And it requires each of us saying, what can I do? How can I be a part? Where can I plug in? What is my gift? What has God given me? And here's the thing that I'll tell you that I found true for me. When I was in corporate world, I loved my corporate job. I enjoyed what I did, and I was pretty good at what I did. But it didn't fully fulfill me. There was this other piece of me, these other talents, skills, and abilities that God had given me that thankfully I was able to use when I plugged in and volunteered in the local church. I was just as busy as all of you are busy. We had kids. I had a full-time job. I drove an hour to work one way, an hour home. Living in Atlanta is not as peachy as it may sound. But I said, this is where I know I can gain fulfillment. And so I said, I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to bring my little Lunchable, and God, I hope you can use it. I hope for some of you, that's what you find to be true as well. And that you find that Wiregrass Church is a place that you want to plug your talent, skills, and abilities in. Because when we think about how do we be the church that removes unnecessary obstacles, it's going to require us to all use our talent, skills, and ability to do what God's called us to do as the local church. If this is your first Sunday here, you get a pass. Unless you're just like, I'm all in. I needed somebody to say that. Then come on, jump in. Those of you that are already serving, thank you. Don't forget the fact in our miracle today that Jesus is more than enough and that he wants to use your talent, skills, and abilities. But for those of you who say, this is my church, this is my local church, I want to be a part of this. I want to see God move in it because God's moving. I want to encourage you to take a step. To take a step with your talent, skills, and abilities and be a part of what God is doing here. This church is a volunteer-driven model. We thrive when we all move forward together. And you're needed. Imagine the fulfillment that you can find when you plug into God's big story. I do believe it changes our lives, just as it changed the lives of the disciples, just as it changed the lives of that little boy. This morning, I couldn't end without giving you a step, and I can't walk away without feeling like giving you a QR code on a Sunday morning. So on this QR code right up here is a chance for you to jump in and serve. If you're ready, I just want to give you the chance. Scan it, let us know, we'll follow up with you, and you can be a part of God's big vision, not just for us meeting here together, but also as we continue to love Dothan and we are for our community, and we get to see God continue to move here at Wiregrass Church. Thank you for those who've already done it. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Our hope is that you fall in love with what God's doing and that you jump in and use your talent, skills, and abilities. I know I've said that over and over and over, but we all have them and God can use them, but only when we bring them to him and say, God, they're yours. Now I can't wait to see what you do with it. Let me pray for us. God, this morning, I thank you that we get to read what it was that Jesus was doing, God, and you revealed to us how much you do love us, God, the compassion you have through your son, Jesus, and how you truly care, not only for our physical, but for our spiritual needs, God. And God, I thank you for the talent, skills, and abilities that you give each and every one of us, God, and that they all matter. God, for those who are ready to take that step, who are ready to jump in and be a part of what you're doing here as we continue to grow this church for you, God, that you'll give them the courage to say yes. And God, help us all to take something we've heard here today, God, and let's apply it in our life, even if it's a way it changes the way we think about how you provide for us. God, and then also give us all the courage to invite someone that we interact with to come and be a part of what you're doing at Wiregrass Church next week. And I pray all these things in your son's name. Amen.